This is the Classical Republican reading Isaiah Berlin's Two Concepts of Liberty, Part 4. The only true method of attaining freedom, we are told, is by the use of critical reason, understanding of what is necessary and what is contingent. If I am a schoolboy, all but the simplest truths of mathematics obtrude themselves as obstacles to the free functioning of my mind. As theorems whose necessity I do not understand, they are pronounced to be true by some external authority, and present themselves to me as foreign bodies which I am expected mechanically to absorb into my system. But when I understand the functions of the symbols, the axioms, the formation and transformation rules, the logic whereby the conclusions are obtained, and grasp that these things cannot be otherwise, because they appear to follow from the laws that govern the processes of my own reason, then mathematical truths no longer obtrude themselves as external entities forced upon me, which I must receive whether I want it or not, but as something which I now freely will in the course of the natural functioning of my own rational activity. For the mathematician, the proof of these theorems is part of the free exercise of his natural reasoning capacity. For the musician, after he has assimilated the pattern of the composer's score and has made the composer's ends his own, the playing of the music is not obedience to external laws, a compulsion and a barrier to liberty, but a free, unimpeded exercise. The player is not bound to the score as an ox to the plow, or a factory worker to the machine. He has absorbed the score into his own system, has, by understanding it, identified it with himself, has changed it from an implement to free activity into an element in that activity itself. What applies to music or mathematicians must, we are told, in principle apply to all other obstacles which present themselves as so many lumps of external stuff, blocking free self-development. That is the program of enlightened rationalism from Spinoza to the latest, at times unconscious, disciplines or disciples of Hegel sapere aude. What you know, that of which you understand the necessity, the rational necessity, you cannot, while remaining rational, want to be otherwise. For you want something to be other than what it must be is given the premises, the necessities that govern the world, to be pro tanto, either ignorant or irrational. Passions, prejudices, fears, neuroses spring from ignorance and take the form of myths and illusions. To be ruled by myths, whether they spring from the vivid imaginations of unscrupulous charlatans who deceive us in order to exploit us, or from psychological or sociological causes, is a form of heteronomy, of being dominated by outside factors in a direction not necessarily willed by the agent. The scientific determinists of the 18th century supposed that the study of the sciences of nature and the creation of sciences of society on the same model would make the operation of such causes transparently clear, and thus enable individuals to recognize their own part in the working of a rational world, frustrating only when misunderstood. Knowledge liberates, as Epicurus taught long ago, by automatically eliminating irrational fears and desires. Herder, Hegel, and Marx substituted their own vitalistic models of social life for the older, mechanical ones, but believed no less than their opponents that to understand the world is to be freed. They merely differed from them in stressing the part played by change and growth in what made human beings human. Social life could not be understood by an analogy drawn from mathematics or physics. One must also understand history, that is, the peculiar laws of continuous growth, whether by dialectical conflict or otherwise, that govern individuals and groups in their interplay with each other and with nature. Not to grasp this is, according to these thinkers, to fall into a particular kind of error, namely the belief that human nature is static, that its essential properties are the same everywhere and at all times, that it is governed by unvarying natural laws, whether they are conceived in theological or materialistic terms, which entails the fallacious corollary that a wise lawgiver can, in principle, create a perfectly harmonious society at any time by appropriate education and legislation, because rational men in all ages and countries must always demand the same unaltering satisfactions of the same unaltering basic needs. Hegel believed that his contemporaries, and indeed all his predecessors, misunderstood the nature of institutions because they did not understand the laws, the rationally intelligible laws, since they spring from the operation of reason that create and alter institutions, transform human character and human action. Marx and his disciples maintained that the path of human beings was obstructed not only by natural forces or the imperfections of their own character, but even more by the workings of their own social institutions, which they had originally created not always consciously for certain purposes, but whose functioning they systematically came to misconceive, and which thereupon became obstacles in their Creator's progress. He offered social and economic hypotheses to account for the inevitability of such misunderstanding, in particular of the illusion that such man-made arrangements were independent forces, as inescapable as the laws of nature. As instances of such pseudo-objective forces, he pointed to the laws of supply and demand, or of the institution of property, or of the eternal division of society into rich and poor, or owners and workers, as so many unaltering human categories. Not until we had reached a stage at which the spells of these illusions could be broken, that is, until enough men reached a social stage that alone enabled them to understand that these laws and institutions were themselves the work of human minds and hands, historically needed in their day, and later mistaken as inexorable objective powers, could the old world be destroyed, and more adequate and liberating social machinery substituted. We are enslaved by despots, institutions, or beliefs, or neuroses, which can be removed only by being analyzed and understood. We are imprisoned by evil spirits which we have ourselves, albeit not consciously, created, and can exercise them only by becoming conscious and acting appropriately. Indeed, for Marx, Marx's understanding is inappropriate action. I am free if, and only if, I plan my life in accordance with my own will. Plans entail rules. A rule does not oppress me or enslave me if I impose it on myself consciously or accept it freely. Having understood it, whether it was invented by me or by others, provided that it is rational, that is to say, conforms to the necessities of things. To understand why things must be as they must be is to will them to be so. Knowledge liberates not by offering us more open possibilities amongst which we can make our choice, but by preserving us from the frustration of attempting the impossible. To want necessary laws to be other than they are is to be prey to an irrational desire, a desire that what must be X should also be not X. To go further and to believe these laws to be other than what they necessarily are is to be insane. That is the metaphysical heart of rationalism. The notion of liberty contained in it is not the negative conception of a failed, ideally without obstacles, a vacuum in which nothing obstructs me, but the notion of self-direction or self-control. I can do what I will with my own. I am a rational being. Whatever I can demonstrate to myself as being necessary, as incapable of being otherwise in a rational society, that is, in a society directed by rational minds towards goals such as a rational being would have, I cannot, being rational, wish to sweep out of my way. I assimilate it into my substance as I do the laws of logic, of mathematics, of physics, and the rules of art, the principles that govern everything of which I understand, and therefore will the rational purpose by which I can never be thwarted, since I cannot want it to be other than it is. This is the positive doctrine of liberation by reason. Socialized forms of it, widely disparate and opposed to each other as they are at the heart of many of the nationalist, communist, authoritarian, and totalitarian creeds of our day. It may, in the course of its evolution, have wandered far from its rational moorings. Nevertheless, it is this freedom that in democracies and in dictatorships is argued about and fought for in many parts of the world today without attempting to trace the historical evolution of this idea. I should like to comment on some of its vicissitudes.